I just wanted to put some stuff out there last week so that you could be ready a little bit to talk about this morning. But it says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. So we'll stop there for now. It says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. If you back up to verses 11 and 12, I don't know if I have those far enough back, but if you look in your Bibles, the writer already told us and specifically brought out the point here that God gave Sarah the power to have a baby when her time was long past due and Abraham was as good as dead. Yet it happened anyway, because it wasn't up to Sarah and it wasn't up to Abraham to make this happen on their own. It was the power of God, not theirs. And so he who had received the promises, Abraham, he'd walked a long road through these years of frustration and trial and doubt, wrestling with how this promise of his descendants becoming as innumerable as the sand on the seashore or the stars in the sky, how he and Sarah would go through this time where they're now old and now they'll get this promise or this promised child. They went through this moment during this time that they tried to receive the promise on their own. How did they do that? On their own time, on their own. They didn't want to keep waiting for God. So how did that happen? How did they take matters into their own hands? No, I can see what you're saying because say it again. Yes. So, and that almost sounds like it would be Abraham's idea, which it was not. It was Sarah's idea, who's saying, "Hey, we're supposed to have this baby," and she got so desperate to this point and so frustrated that she looks at Abraham and says, "You'll take my maidservant and you'll go into her and we'll have this baby." And that didn't work. That didn't work. They were able to get pregnant, and that's how Ishmael came along. But then God's like, "No, that's not the child of promise. That's not how this works." Because why? Because they were given a direct command that it would be through Abraham and Sarah's seed. That's how this was going to happen. Not through Abraham and someone else. It was going to involve Sarai. So these things are important. It's been a long road then. And finally, by doing that, did their lives get better? Did their lives get easier? No. Things became way, way more complicated than they already were. They just made their lives extremely stressful. It says it put a lot more pressure on their marriage because of the situation. Made Sarah burn with anger and jealousy against her handmaid, which was not even necessarily her fault, her handmaid's fault for having to do this. It was like, this is what you're going to do because this is what we think is fitting. And so now there's this turmoil of looking at Abraham and saying, why is she being this way? And why are you treating that child, this way? And Abraham's like, what do you want from me? I'm just trying to make this work. And so now they're stuck with this situation. They, of course, love Ishmael, but it caused a lot of problems. And so we can see why there is this test on its own that the child of promise finally comes miraculously, and they give birth to Isaac. And with all of that being said of what they've been through, now Abraham is told after years to offer up Isaac, and that he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. Right? So the record shows that Abraham went immediately to do what God had commanded, and without complaint. In verses like this in Hebrews 11, and as well as James 2:21. And it says in both of those areas that Abraham offered up Isaac. In both of those situations, I would say. James 2:21 is the other place. And perhaps there's something here to this language. I don't press it super hard because I don't know if if you can press it super hard, but I think there's something here. It says in both of those places this idea that uses both this word offered and then changes to offering up. And so the word offered is the aorist perfect, which indicates a completed act. The word offering, however, which is said after it in the same verse, is an imperfect, which indicates an act uncompleted. The thought is Abraham was so committed to doing what God had commanded that the act counted as complete, even though Isaac was saved from actual death. So it's like he was tested, and when he was tested, he offered up Isaac. It's perfect. It's complete. He did it. And he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It's like it's still to be done, right? It's not complete. But it was. He did everything he was supposed to do. And yet, Isaac was still with him. God had to intervene, is the way that we are to look at it then. If it weren't for God stopping Abraham's hand, Isaac would be dead. God knew it. He knew it for a fact. That's why he had to intervene. And that's why it counts as though it happened. It's why in one way he absolutely offered him. And in the other sense, there was still an offering that was to be brought about. In Isaac, or you could word it and say he who had received promises was offering up. It's like it's still not fully done in another sense. And it was he to whom it was said, in Isaac your descendants shall be called. So he's really emphasizing and magnifying this point that in Isaac is how he was to receive the promises. And let me get my notes here. Sorry, it jumped. A bit after, God makes it clear that it would not be through his son Ishmael, but in Isaac shall your seed be called. That's Genesis 21:12. Abraham had begotten, that's verse 17, 2 sons, but only one of those sons was unique, and one of those sons was being referenced here, because he had been conceived by the 2 people who were no longer physically able to conceive without God's help. Romans 4:17 is a really good verse of supplemental material there, but that's why it says his only begotten son. The reason it's categorized as that, even though Ishmael was involved, was because it was their only son between him and Sarah, which to God was the only thing that mattered in this moment. There was no other promise given for any other child through any other situation besides Abram and Sarai. That is who he gave this awesome promise about. When God asked Abraham to offer up Isaac, it was a tremendous test of his willingness to obey God. But he did obey. And the command was to kill his son Isaac, who was the one through whom the promises could come. He not only had to then wrestle with the idea of putting to death his son of promise. This is his son. It's precious to him. Imagine if you couldn't have a child and God finally gave you that child. Imagine then having to sacrifice that child. I can't. I literally can't. It would be one of the most unbearable things. And yet we are told that Abraham popped up immediately, even after being asked something so hard. And he went to that mountain. He didn't put it off. He did it immediately. That he took his son. His boy would have had to have been, people think, around the age of 10 to 13 years old. This is a lot of time that Abraham has had to hold him up and say, "You're my boy. God promised you. He promised you, and we messed it up. We messed it up and didn't wait. And so we're thankful for Ishmael as well, but you're the one who came the way that God said you would. And we waited for you." And I just think about how horrendous that would be. But now, not only the pulling of just a natural parent flesh and instinct to say, "That's my baby boy." He is the son of promise. God makes it clear, this is the one that all the promises that I have given to you, Abraham, he's the one. He's the ticket. And so Abraham's sitting here going, "Okay, God, you promised me that all these blessings that will carry on through generation and through nations, that all nations will be blessed through this seed of promise." And he says, "And you're wanting me to go sacrifice him." Now, we don't have, it may have happened, but I think a big part of why this was an incredible test was not just the sense that he had to do these things, but we don't see Abraham arguing. He's not just sitting here arguing with God saying, "Why? What are you saying? What are you doing?" And, you could take that as a character flaw, but it's not. And we'll get to why it's not a character flaw in just a moment. But Abraham rightfully trusted in the one who gives the blessings in the first place. He had it in his mind that the one whom asked Sarah why she laughed when he said that they would have a son, and then he said this to Abraham right after, "Is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Genesis 18:14. Abraham trusted in that God, the one who said, "Even though your bodies are practically dead, I'm going to give you a son." And he did. He trusted in that God, the God who does impossible things. And so Abraham is heading to this mountain, and he's in anguish, I'm sure, and yet he's trusting. He's saying, "I don't know what this is. I don't know why we're doing this, but I will do it." He acted in full faith, and because of this, God provided the ram in the bushes, Genesis 22:13. And Abraham called the place Yahweh Provides, because God always provides for the faithful and keeps his promises. And so he goes up this mountain, and he knows that God is going to in some way bring them back down. And I don't have the the verse. I don't know why. It's probably somewhere else in my notes. But it's the verse that what does Abraham say? How do we know he's not just this crazy person with a weird character flaw that just says, "Okay, well, I'm supposed to sacrifice my son, and I'm going to go do that, and there's no argument, and I'm just going to do whatever God says"? How do we know that he instead had it in his mind that the God who can do impossible things will just do yet another impossible thing? How do we see that in the original text in Genesis 21?
Are you talking about when he tells his son that, when he questions about where's the sacrifice, and then Abraham says God will provide?
Yes. Yes, that's one instance. He says God will provide. Okay? But before that, what happens? They're at the bottom of the mountain, and he's ridden with Isaac to this mountain, and there were servants with them. And what did Abraham say to his servants? He says, we will be back. We will return. Well, Abraham knows the plan. Isaac doesn't. And so you have both this beforehand saying to the servants, we're gonna be back. And I think Abraham fully believed that. I don't think he's lying to somehow lie, just to say, well, I'm going to go kill him and we won't both be back. To keep Isaac okay, I don't think it's what he was doing. I think he meant it fully in his mind that he meant it. And the Hebrew writer is going to show us that that's what he meant in verse 19. And so he says that to those men, and then the boy himself turns and says, Dad, what are we going to offer up here? And he goes, the Lord will provide, son. And he does. So verse 19, he considered that God is able to raise people, even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type. In Abraham's mind, he says, if a God can bring life from which no life should possibly be able to come, he reverses it in his mind and he says, just as assuredly as he gave Isaac when we were as good as dead, he can give me back Isaac when he is dead. And that is incredible faith, y'all. That is why Abraham is the father of faith. That is incredible faith. That you are going to immediately shift a gear categorically in your mind and use inference and what you know about God to not let his character be weakened, to not let his demands make you say, who are you, God? You're a bad God. You must be evil. But he rearranges the whole world to say, you are good, God. And I don't know what good's going to come from this. I don't know how you're going to make good from this. But you're the good God who gave me Isaac. And you will be the good God who gives me him back. And I think that's just incredible. I think it's an incredible thing that he's done here. Go ahead.
Well, I think that for a lot of Christians, we talk about, we try to, in order to relate to God, sacrificing his son. For some Christians, it's hard still to relate to that because of who God is.
Absolutely.
And so, to put what you said earlier about, with whether we could do it, Abraham, I'm going to use the term, nothing special about him.
Sure.
He was just there.
Yeah.
He's father like any of us,
Yes.
And you think about people that watch their kids go to the military or police or whatever, or dangerous jobs. And if you think of another human father doing this, I mean, I can't put myself in it. I mean, I couldn't get it up the hill.
Sure.
And to be able to not only make up the hill, but to build the altar and to pick up his son or tell him to get up the road like that and to raise a knife. I mean, I think this example helps us maybe to better understand what God went through, because it wasn't easy for God
Yes.
either. But some Christians have a struggle, at least in my history, of understanding and grasping a closeness to God, of understanding how God felt with Christ compared to this. And so I think, it just...
Yeah. No, that's very good. That's all very good. I really appreciate that, and I think it's a good segue here of what you're saying. So, which he also received him back as a type. So this is kind of what Mitch is talking about here. By the way, I was writing this. I wasn't trying to be rude while you were talking, but this Genesis 22:5 is the text where he says, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." So he's assuring them that they're going to go worship and they're going to come back. Faithfulness means then acting upon the promises of a God who never lies. That's a part of it. So he received him back as a type. The writer uses the word type in this reference to Abraham and Isaac, indicating that he finds some symbolic meaning of this. The word means figuratively speaking, or literally in a parable. There's a lesson in this. There is something figurative going on beyond just the physical that applies to something else. He used this same word in Hebrews 9, 9. I'll write that there next to it. Hebrews 9:9. When he told us that the Holy Spirit was signifying something through the two parts of the tabernacle, and that the first, or the outer tabernacle, the holy place, is a parable or figurative, a symbol for the pre-messianic age of time. And it seems the writer is blatantly saying this verse is pointing to the Christ also. Perhaps even that he sees Abraham figuratively receiving his son back from the dead as a foreshadowing of God actually receiving the son back from the dead. That it's not even just as we say it, that there's this similar Isaac takes the wood on his back, he walks up, the son asks the father, and the father says God will provide. So many things between the cross and crucifixion and the father and the son and Abraham and Isaac. But also going a step further, that as Isaac was sacrificed and offered, and yet he still came back down that mountain, the Hebrew writer says, in a way, God raised him from the dead in that moment. And in a way, that is pointing directly to what the Father did with his own Son. That this was a foreshadowing of Jesus all the way. That the offering of Isaac and receiving him back points to Jesus.
So there are some translations that actually go that far in saying that.
Mm-hmm.
That in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead.
Yes.
So,
Yes, I agree. Go ahead.
He didn't die.
Yes.
I mean, we can say it symbolizes Christ, but he didn't die. That was part of the promise. And I think, sometimes we think we can't have faith as Abraham. We can.
Sure.
Because of one, Jesus died on the cross for us.
Absolutely.
We can have the exact same faith that Abraham has. No matter whatever happens to us that we think is bad and everything else, if we have faith like Abraham, which we have through Christ,
Yeah.
then we're going to come down off the mountain and worship him. I mean, it's...
Absolutely. I think that, and I agree with you, I think that this reason that it says back as a type is because that's what we're saying here. It's bridging the gap between a figurative death, because in a way, Isaac did die on that mountain in some figurative way, because he was as good as dead, walking up when he offered him up. The only reason he wasn't dead is because God stopped him from killing him. And so in that sense, in God's mind, it is though he completed the act completely. And that's why it's figurative, and what you're saying is completely correct. One of the biggest differences between Isaac and Jesus would be Jesus actually died. But that's what I think he's meaning as a type. But what you're saying is spot on in all of these ways, which is we have this faith in Jesus. Jesus did have to fully die. He did fully die. There was no figurative in Jesus at all. It was a literal death. Jesus did die. And we see a complete fulfillment there for sure. And the pain, as Mitch was bringing up, the pain that was for the Father is huge. It's a huge pain. It's something that if you think Abraham offering Isaac was bad, then you are only scratching the surface of what it would have been for the Father to offer up his Son. And these are really good things for us to be able to be hit in the heart about, because sometimes we don't think about it enough. So Abraham knew the promise depended upon Isaac being alive. Therefore he reasoned that God, who miraculously brought forth his son, could raise Isaac from the dead if needed, and that's a tremendous faith. So verse 20, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. So now we're moving on, and this is going back to our pattern. It's resetting here. So it's starting over right here again, like it's been doing for the past 17 verses or 20 verses in Hebrews, chapters 11. And now he's moving on to Isaac. But is there any other thoughts before we move on from that? Hopefully none of that was confusing or I lost you in any of that. But it's a really awesome text about Abraham and about Isaac and that whole scenario and the faith of Abraham. And like we had talked about, I think early on, notice how many times, this is Hebrews 11, 13 through 15, and I don't have the other ones. But if you keep going back, we've already been talking about Abraham, as before this. And he comes back to Abraham because Abraham has so much to offer when it comes to the topic of faith. So, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. It's a bit more difficult to see how this is an example of how the righteous live by faithfulness, and illustrating principles of Habakkuk 2:4. For those of you who weren't here, all of this is, if you go back to Hebrews 10 at the end, he quotes Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4, and all of Hebrews 11 is really showing that. The righteous, the principle of the righteous live by faithfulness. That's what he's showing by this whole chapter. And so you kind of look at this verse and you say, well, this is a little different. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. Why do you think that is showing faith? It's kind of different than the very simplistic, straightforward ideas that we've been looking at so far.
God's got a plan.
Sure. Absolutely. So the blessings given by fathers to sons and grandfathers in Genesis, and we could open this up and study this for a while, but I'll just tell you that the blessings that are extended from fathers to sons or by fathers to sons and grandsons in the time of Genesis were much more than just like I wish you well. It's the equivalent of a physical inheritance of a reading of a will spiritually. Like, it's not a wish you well. If the father says it to the son or the grandson, it's because God ordained it, which means when you're passing that through as a blessing, it's happening that way. That's what's going to happen because God sees in the future and sees what's going on, and the blessing is more prophetic. It's more of a prophetic utterance than it is just like a wishing. And this really helps us with understanding certain issues in Genesis where you're like, okay, just take it back. Not how it works. And all of the fathers of faith understood this. And although we don't understand it because we just say, well, it's just some words, it's like it's not how it works. I said this because this is how it will be. Because God wants it this way. That's how they felt. If it was said, then it was said. And so it will be. So Genesis makes it clear that these blessings had the force of predictive prophecy. They were divine messages given by God about the irrevocable plan of God. And so in a way, they're peeling back what's going to happen, and they're literally telling these sons what is going to happen in their lives. And what was said in those blessings would surely come to pass. God would make it so. This is why when Isaac learned of Jacob's deception, he told the grieving Esau, I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed. Genesis 27:33. That seems like a cut in the heart, like a ruthless father. But he's saying, he's saying, Esau, I've already done it. I've already given the blessing. That's why he also tried to verify multiple times in his blindness and his vulnerability. Is this really the right son? He didn't just throw it out there because it's a big deal. It's a big deal to offer up this blessing. And so, verse 21, and so what we see by that is, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau regarding things to come. It was this faithfulness to know that God still had the situation handled. That no matter, even when I don't understand it, and this seems like a really foul thing of deception, he doesn't take it back. He says, it will be so. It will be so with Jacob, and it will be so with Esau. And then he says, by faith, Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. So Joseph from his, or Jacob later did exactly the same thing when he was old. Jacob said to his sons, gather around so I can tell you what will happen to you in days to come. Now that's something to note there. Genesis 49:1. So that makes it a lot more clear by the time you get to Jacob why these promises are more than just wish-you-wells. Jacob says, come here, let me tell you what's about to be your life. And that's really something. So they're all around Jacob's deathbed, and the blessings are imparted both by Isaac and Jacob concerning the things of the future. So by actually verbalizing it and imparting the blessing, the patriarch was carrying out God's will, doing what God wanted to be done. And so to do otherwise would have been rebellion against God and his clearly communicated will. Even if I foul up and I mess up, they looked at that and said, but God knew I would mess up. God knew Jacob was going to deceive me. And so it remains. Even though I can't see it and you can't see it, this is how it was supposed to be. And so he trusted the promises of God and was so moved by these things that he was going to keep them the same. Now, I'm trying to think. I believe with Joseph, if you remember right, how did we see that situation kind of, with Jacob, it was that he deceived his father. But now Joseph is going to be one of Jacob's sons, and he gets to the end of his life. And what weird thing happened there where it's like, no, that's not right. Do you remember what happened?
When he was blessing Joseph's son.
Yes. Ephraim and the mix-up of he basically is trying to lead him and say, this is the right one. This is the one you're supposed to bless. And he's like moving him. And he hits him with one of these. He crosses his hands. He's like, oh, no. And he says, this is the way it's to be. And it's like, oh, wow. So that's once again, it's this Jacob was showing this same faith. It's not, it may seem like a screw up to me and you. This is how God wants it to be. And so we see it in faith. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, let me mark that before I forget. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones. So Joseph, from his deathbed, told his brothers that one day God would bring them up out of Egypt and give them the land he had promised to Abraham. So you can see much faith being involved there. As he foretold the exodus, he instructed that his bones be carried back to Canaan by his people. That's Genesis 50, verses 25 and 26. I know it's hard to read. Genesis 50, 25 through 26, that he's instructing them. He's basically looking into the future, and he says, listen, we are going to receive the promised land. The promised land that was promised to Abraham, that was to be brought through Isaac, that was to be brought through Jacob, that was to be brought through me, and that will now be brought through you. God is not off track. Everything is okay. We are going to receive the promised land. And when we do, bring my bones there. He's looking with full assurity and telling them what he wants them to do to bring him back to his people. He trusted the promises of God, and he was so certain about them that he prompted to issue those orders in Genesis 50, 25 through 26. And that is both living and dying by faith. Okay, so by faith, Moses. Let's try to stick with the same colors here. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents. Okay, so Moses will be mentioned again. It's a trait you see with those who are very faithful, that he has ample material. He has tons of material that he can go over. So it's like he's going to mention Moses here, and then he's going to come back and still be mentioning Moses. In fact, all that you see right here is all going to be about Moses, this whole entire page from 23 to 29, and I think it continues. No, so that's all of it right there. But that's a lot. It's a lot just by one out of this whole chapter, one character that we see being mentioned that much. And it's because Moses was absolutely full of faith, for sure. But what's interesting here is by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months. Okay, so Moses, this is kind of weird because it says by faith, Moses, when he was born. So the way that this has been going, it's been that every person that's mentioned right after by faith, that person is immediately said, and then after, it points to why they have faith, right? But then it gets to Moses, so following the pattern, you're expecting this to be the reason why there's faith. And so you read it and you say, by faith, Moses, when he was born, and you're like, okay, why is a baby? Babies don't have faith. They don't need faith. And so what does that mean? Well, you've got to read the whole thing. It says, by faith when he was born. So we know it couldn't have been faith yet for him. He was hidden for 3 months by his parents. So this is actually who we're talking about here. So it's choppy in English, but basically what it's saying is by faith, Moses' parents hid him when he was a baby. So it's like completely reversed from how it is in the order, and it makes you go, what are you talking about? It kind of interrupts the order of what you've been used to. But it's actually this right here. By faith, his parents, Moses' parents, when he was born, hid him for 3 months. And so you say, okay, but why was that by faith? Because they were not afraid of the king's edict. Okay, so you're going to have to turn to Exodus 1 for any of that to make sense, or you just have to know Exodus pretty well. But it says in Exodus 1, we'll put 8 through 10, now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply, and in the event of war, they will also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. Exodus 1:22, so the Pharaoh, that would be the king, commands all his people, that would be the edict, saying, every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive. So that would be verse 22 of Exodus 1. And, we could go into this, but actually, first, what was said in Exodus 1? Do you remember? It's incredible. So this is the edict that finally happens to all the people. But what happened first? What was his plan first to stop all these Hebrews from having all these babies that he was really scared, what did he ask? How did he try to resolve it first?
Kill the male babies.
Yeah, and that's what he ends up getting to. But if you look in Exodus 1, the way he starts to say that we need to cut down these births is that he sends out two of his own, what is the word? Midwives, thank you, my word. Midwives that come and deal with it, and they are his chosen ones that he says, get there, and when they have the baby, kill them. If they're a boy, kill them. And it starts to not work. And he's saying, why isn't this working? And they make the excuse, they're so mighty and they're so vigorous that they get the job done and have the babies before we can even get to them. And he's like, okay. And so and it says that they actually didn't want to do the will of the Pharaoh, and that those midwives were choosing to do the will of God in fear of him. That's pretty incredible. And so it ruins the Pharaoh's plans. And then he says, okay, the new edict is you, every person, if there's a boy, you kill it. He says that to everyone. Now you are held at will and will be killed yourself if he finds out any different. Which means if you have a child and it's a boy in this time, he's going to know if you don't do it because you would be keeping the boy around. So give it a couple of years, he's going to say, you obviously didn't follow my edict, and then he would kill the child anyway. It's a really bad problem. It's a really big deal. And so that would be terrifying, right? So
It wasn't working either. The reality was that
Moses had a brother.
yep, that's right.
so
That's absolutely right.
there was no. There may have been some deaths, but and I'm sure there was.
Yeah.
But for the reality of it, Moses' parents, this wasn't going to work.
Yep, 100%. That's their faith. Their faith was showing that this was not an option. And so Exodus 1:22, then Pharaoh commanded all the people, saying, every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive. So the faithfulness in view in verse 23 is all on the parents, not the children. And it's referring to him. Now it says something odd kind of here that people sometimes note. I'd say atheists would have a problem. They saw he was a beautiful child. Beautiful. And they were not afraid of the king's edict. So there was two reasons. Because they saw that he was beautiful and they were not. Now the Hebrew writer, he doesn't even deal with that in the sense of he just repeats what Exodus 1 says because the child was beautiful. He doesn't really give any type of expounding on that. Well, when you look and you go back to it, you'll see that ESV and NIV says he was a fine boy. King James Version says he was a goodly child. The word means good. And so probably touching mainly upon the health of the boy, basically saying he was alive and well, I think is really the idea. The idea is what parent wouldn't have looked at their new baby boy and said he's beautiful? They're not vain like a lot of people today and say stupid things like, child's really ugly when they come out or whatever, and they'll get prettier. It's like, well, I understand that. I understand what we're saying. But in your mind, I don't think that's fully it. I don't think he came out this beautiful baby, and maybe he did. But in the eyes of his mother, he was beautiful, right? He's just this beautiful boy because he's alive and he's well and things are okay with him. And so therefore, that is what triggers, so I will keep him alive because he is living. Because he is living, I will not kill him, is the idea. We're over time. I didn't even realize. I'm sorry. So anyway, we'll come back to this. This is good stuff, and I'm glad we're going slow in Hebrews 11. We'll pick up a lot next week and into these next two chapters.